Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now because my iPad definitely isn't confirming that to me, unfortunately. I hope we won't have any technical issues. There were some internet issues, I believe, storm related at the end of my last stream. This is why YouTube cut it off into two parts, and then it took a couple of hours to reconnect it. Thankfully, it didn't completely kill the views on that video, but let's hope this doesn't happen at all today, because this is actually a stream that is very near and dear to me, because as you guys know, ever since like my iPhone 15 focused videos, I have really liked breaking down videos that cover camera comparison between smartphone camera flagships, and in this case we are talking about the iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is currently by basically every major reviewer standards the smartphone camera king. I think the Pixel can in some scenarios definitely take better stills while dramatically losing in video and not always being quite as consistent, which is ironic because that used to be a Pixel strength, as the iPhone. Well, the only thing the Pixel is really consistent in is taking pixel photos, which is those cold, like cool hue photos, but again, I'm not here to confirm or deny how good the Pixel 8 Pro is or not. I'm here to talk about how now the Galaxy S24 Ultra compares to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, I've looked into those videos a little bit on my large 4K TV. I haven't watched them fully, so I can experience most of it with you guys. I saved the video in 1080p because unfortunately YouTube doesn't let me download them in higher quality than 1080p, but I hope that's still going to be enough to get like a high quality experience, and I will occasionally zoom in, take breaks. For now, this is working better than when I save media directly to OBS, because there I cannot zoom, and it's just a mess. Like, the video encoders gave me problems, so I'm doing this directly through the YouTube web app, and I'm taking two videos right now that I would like to analyze. One is coming later on, that is SuperSaf's camera comparison. Obviously, SuperSaf is a huge YouTuber, but I did want to give my respect to TechTablets, a YouTuber I did not know, around 500,000 subscribers, so definitely doing quite well for himself though, and he was the first one to post a comprehensive comparison between the S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. So out of respect, and because I already started preparing kind of with him in mind, I do want to start with his video and then later move on to SuperSaf's video. As always, please let me know if there are any problems with audio or video or the stream in general. If you have any kind of big questions that need to be answered right away. As you guys know, I loved responding. I love interacting with chat. Now, judging from my last video, I'm kind of not very optimistic how many people will join us for the video, because YouTube algorithm seems to have been very angry with me for my 3-week hiatus. So hopefully us resuming regular content here will also result in more and more people coming into our streams and the community to keep growing. Over time, I do expect to make less and less live content, because quite honestly, smaller, prepared, edited videos do perform a lot better. But for now, this is a kind of like format that I feel very comfortable with. It's a type of video that I've now done a couple of times. So please let me know what you think, and over time we'll keep evolving, I promise. So without further ado, let's get started, and thank you to TechTablets and SuperSaf for putting out some great content. Hopefully my content will be transformative enough to not get me into trouble.
Down in Auckland, New Zealand, with another camera comparison. It's the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra
Cheers.
Versus the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Front-facing cameras, they are 12 megapixels. We have electronic image stabilization, 4K 30 frames per second. I'm swapping over the audio sources so we can listen to which one does sound.
So my first impressions here are that the HDR on the Samsung video is actually quite impressive. There are a lot of like stark contrasts, I would say. The iPhone is pretty bright, which probably works better for a video in general. Like I think the way his face is like very darkened here. It looks like it's in shadow. I don't know how much it actually is in shadow based on like the smartphone covering much of the sun over his face. I do find his skin color a lot more pleasing, but this is not like a definitive statement because I obviously don't know what like his skin tone is in real life. And then beyond that, I don't have a problem with either one. I think both are high quality enough, and I think this is the kind of comparison that almost becomes a non-issue when the quality is high enough. I would say in general though, the color reproduction does look a little oversaturated and fakeish on the Galaxy S24 Ultra, and there's some over sharpening going on like in the hair area. Like some of it doesn't look like it's actual detail and more like it's artificially enhanced. 26 millimeter on the Galaxy, so the iPhone does give you a wider image. The iPhone does have a better aperture here. I believe Samsung uses a larger sensor though, so it's hard to say that this would be like hardware related. Most likely any kind of changes do come down to the processing.
You think has the best mics, and the stability here, well, a bit of a test, just to jog ahead.
The iPhone is better.
Image stabilization.
Oh yeah, the iPhone is way better.
This is 60 frames per second now, 4K, and you can see that the footage is looking very smooth. This is with our main cameras with their optical and electronic image stabilization. I can take this up now to 5 times with our iPhone, 5 times optical now with the S23.
It's hard actually to tell. I would say the main camera video was way better on the iPhone. I do believe the zoom is a little bit more pleasing though on the Samsung, a little bit sharper here.
The Ultra, which one do you think looks the best? I'll take that up to now 10 times zoom.
Yeah.
With the Samsung, and now 10 times here with our iPhone. That's 10 times exactly. So I can see a bit of a difference here. Certainly to me, looking at the screens, looks like our Samsung has the best zoom video. So I'll go back to our main cameras now, over to the ultra wide.
Hi. To whoever's new in the chat.
This is just electronic image stabilization now, looking smooth.
Wait, why would
finally back?
Wait, why would it be only electronic image stabilization? Can the iPhone not use like sensor shift image stabilization during videos? Like, and Samsung does have optical image stabilization as well, just not quite as advanced. Man, the colors on the Samsung are really displeasing to me at this point, because the iPhone is like known for being too warm, right? It's kind of like the opposite of the Pixel in that regard. Yet Samsung over the last 2 or 3 generations kind of has managed to overtake Apple in that regard, where like but it's not like consistently slightly yellowish the way iPhones sometimes are, which by the way they mostly are that in low light, because that's how Apple's like image not compression, like aggregation algorithm works. Samsung just has weird colors in general. Here the iPhone looks way more true to life here, and also if you just look for example at the cars here, like I'll zoom in, yes we are working from 1080p, but there seems to be a lot more detail there on the iPhone side. Again, this is video, so I actually am not displeased overall with the S24 Ultra in context of like what it means generationally. Just in general though, I believe the iPhone's video capabilities are still unmatched, at least on the main sensor.
Main cameras 4K 60 frames per second. Low light 4K 30 frames per second, so difficult conditions here. Which one do you think looks the best?
It's difficult to say, right? I think the sky is much more pleasing to the eye on the Samsung. How often do you actually get like this kind of sky color in the night is another question. Both cameras seem to struggle with a continuous focus on this. I wonder if like ProRAW or whatever other mode, ProRes, for example, would have helped out with that. Obviously, the iPhone also has like log recording, which dramatically transforms its capabilities in such low light scenarios. I don't know if Samsung has something that much equivalent now, but yeah, it's hard to tell which one wins. The sky is better on the Samsung, I would say. It looks better. I wouldn't say it's necessarily more realistic because of that. And also you can see that the iPhone does get a little warmer in low light because that's how it compensates for low light.
As I move ahead, you can see that the stabilization...
But by the way, you can also see that Samsung has, for example, completely forsaken for the grass to be green. So even though the iPhone might look a little fakish with its yellowish tint, right, on what I assume is a mostly white building, right, you can see whatever Apple is doing to basically make the default white tone like more warm. It works very well, like for the grass, versus what Samsung is doing. For one, kills any kind of like impression that this is actually grass. Also, like when you look at this front bush or smallish tree, there's dramatically more detail. I would say now that we are here, the amount of extra detail on the iPhone, also the amount of stabilization that seems to be happening, right? Because this isn't just detail that is happening here. When you look at those two people in the background, right, they are visible as people with legs and arms and heads on the iPhone, versus on Samsung, they are just abstract shapes. This is a dramatic add-on in detail, and what's absolutely crazy about it, it looks like really nothing is in focus on the Samsung, while a little bit of everything is in focus on the iPhone. Now let's see if maybe like the next image will change that, right? Because both were going a little bit in and out of focus. Right, you can see that Samsung does have like its moment where it gets sharper, but it does not get as sharp as the iPhone.
Does not look as good as daylight. I'm just panning.
Yeah, like the grass is like not really green at all. The detail on the iPhone is better across the building, even across the background tree, and then the foreground is leaps and bounds better. And then even look at, by the way, the HDR capabilities during video, right? You can see that here you can actually see that there's like a light source, which is what I assume is like a kind of entrance. Here, this looks like some kind of like heavenly entry from Bruce Almighty. Like you're just getting light and then those abstract shapes that are supposed to be people. The iPhone wins this by a wide margin.
Yeah. See any drop frames, even if it is low light, they should hopefully not be dropping any frames at all. Zoom cameras now, so which one do you think looks the best with low light? I think, just looking at the screen,
the iPhone. There's a lot of over sharpening here on the Samsung, I can tell immediately. But also, like, assuming that both are actually getting their focus right, yeah, I think you can tell it really well, right? You can see, like, the plant shape overall here, and then the table with, like, some appropriate level of softness, while everything on Samsung that it believes it knows has a shape is over sharpened to a hefty degree. Just look at that leg, right? It's just like, look at this heavy contrast between where the pants end and like the foot begins. While on the iPhone, this is a much more natural transition. There's like overhead light here. There's nothing stark contrasty here that would create this the look that we see on Samsung, except for the Samsung camera. Also, when we look at the sign here, which I assume is like a no smoking sign, right? Obviously the detail isn't great on either image, But because Samsung didn't have like any understanding what this was, right? It took this and then it over sharpened its edge to the point where it like, look, I know the angle is a little different, but this almost makes it look as if part of this is the head of the table. While on the iPhone, we have this natural separation of objects that obviously is infinitely more true to life. Also here, when we look at that blue, I don't know, some sign about, I get maybe the services offered there or anything, right? You can see, like, you definitely cannot read the text, right? But what is on here is recognizable as text. That is not recognizable as text. This could just be almost like continuous lines. If he says Samsung wins it, I lose a lot of respect.
At the moment that the Galaxy S24 Ultra does have a bit of an advantage here.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I'm sorry. That is exactly what happens when you look at a slightly oversaturated image on what I assume is a slightly oversaturated screen by default settings. This is so much better, and I mean, even he corrected himself basically in editing by saying the iPhone OIS is better here. And the point is, though, that he's trying to basically say, oh, the iPhone looks a little softer, but it remains way better in focus. The problem with when you look at actually what you can see here, for example, here you can see that this is like the light coming up from that little lamp, right? It's like partially reflective of the surfaces around it. Here it paints it almost, right? This is not how light works. It almost changes the surface. This is not how real life objects work. This is dramatically over sharpened. Like, I don't know why more people don't see it. Like, this is actually pretty apparent, and I'm no video expert here, but yeah, you could have, by the way, like completely taken out, but by the way, I didn't even look which one was the iPhone, which one was the Galaxy S24 throughout the entire image. I guessed it right, and yeah, the right one is the iPhone, because it was so clear from the differences in how the images are being processed. It's so different.
With its 5 times optical camera.
Also, like, look at how much, like, really raw, like, issues there are with the stabilization on the camera here on Samsung. It, like, literally fluctuates.
5 times with the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
And again, like, even when we look at that very small, like, HDR issue, right? Like, look at that tree, right? If this was a stills photo, I would have guessed that this was the iPhone and this was Samsung, because the HDR is better on this image, obviously, right? But here it gets the green and the overall rest of the image, right? Even though this isn't even in focus fully. And here it's just black contrast. There is nothing about the green of the tree here any more visible.
And onto our still shots.
Oh god, oh my god, I will get rimmed for this. This looks so much better on the iPhone. Oh, why? Why do you do that to me? Please choose something that looks better on the Samsung.
So this portrait here, the white balance is best with the iPhone, and I do find the iPhone...
I mean, it almost looks like the Galaxy had some focal issues here. At least the cutouts are working well on both images. Man, that background though, right? You can almost see the blur in the background is like not totally coherent on the Samsung, almost as if this is like super close to him, but it's not. And then here the bokeh depth of field is so much better, and the colors are so much more pleasing, and the shadows are handled even better on his shirt. Man, this is hurting me. I don't want to be an Apple sheep here. Like, oh no.
Phone does capture my eyes a little bit better. Stitching on both is good. And the Samsung looking a little soft this
Yeah, I mean, it's still not looking a little soft. It looks out of focus. I have no idea why that happened. Maybe he ever so slightly moved, but I would have retaken that picture. This looks like, guys, if this was like a Galaxy S20 picture, I would have believed it. There is probably some pre-release software problem here. This, I hardly believe that this would be the actual real life difference. Look. And I'll go with you step by step. If you, by the way, I'm looking at my tablet because my chat is there. If you disagree with me, or if you think I'm an Apple sheep, let me know. Let me know if I'm overseeing something. I've, like he himself said that his skin tone looks better here, so I'm taking him at his word. The sharpness difference is dramatical. The depth of field effect is much more pronounced. Whether that's 100% accurate, I don't know. I don't know how far away that tree branch actually was or wasn't. Then you have this immense amount of extra detail throughout his t-shirt. You have like even a little bit of a it's not even a 3 o'clock shadow, I guess it's like a noon o'clock shadow. And like you have even like the colors, which is like you have this nice contrast between the yellow and stuff. It looks so much better on the iPhone. It's not even funny.
image. I don't know why it was in focus. Selfie portrait.
I'll actually say I do like the skin tone here on the Galaxy. This is, by the way, why I've told people time and time again, you cannot just believe that the iPhone always takes the warmest pictures of any phone. That just is not the case. That is usually a problem of low light photography for Apple. In daylight scenarios, the iPhone will actually, more often than not, for white people, err on the cooler side when it comes to skin tones. I think both images are fantastic. I do prefer his skin tone a little more on the Samsung. I think there's a little bit more nicer like skin detail on the iPhone, but I don't think it's a major issue. I do like how more black basically, his backpack and well, the glasses, I would say, about the same are on the iPhone. Very pleasing images, both. Would love to know which one was more accurate at that moment. I think both would be very well received if posted to social media. No problem here whatsoever with Samsung. Here, his eye color is pretty similar to mine, and it's captured well by both. So I cannot actually complain here. My cat woke up, so I assume that means she will come to me and complain that I'm not giving her enough attention.
With the Samsung, however, the stitching on the iPhone, what happened here? Not
the stitching on the iPhone, what happened here? Are there any problems with stitching that I'm overseeing? Oh, it's I actually goofed on that one. I thought it was something like an earring of his, but then didn't see that like the same like he didn't have the same thing on the other side. Yeah, in that case, I'm 100% giving the Samsung the win here because better color and no stitching issue in that regard. Nicely done, Samsung.
very good. It seemed to capture a bit of a car in the background, as you can see from my red arrow. This bright sunflower was captured best here with the iPhone. It got...
Oh, yeah. Like, this is like a color depth issue almost. Like, right, you have like this nice separation, even though the colors are like a transitioning layer from one to another, and it's capturing this so well, while it's almost like blending the individual layers a little bit too much on the Samsung, right? 1/3 here looks about the same, then 1/3, and then 1/6 and 1/6 you would say here maybe, while on the iPhone it's like this layer is pretty different, this is pretty different, then there's this, and then there's almost like a small transitioning layer. Yeah, this goes hard in favor of the iPhone. The contrast is beautiful. Also, just like as a sunflower enthusiast, visually, like the yellow tone with this like slight orange tint is very, very pleasing to me. no problem with the cutouts or how anything else is handled here. There's not that much sky on the iPhone image, so I guess the HDR is equal on both. Yeah, nicer image on the iPhone, definitely here.
Got the colors more correct, more true to life of what I saw. And notice that it's the iPhone that is capturing those petals the best, the different shades of the yellow, of the orange there. Not so good there with the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. The Samsung also struggled with this bright yellow flower. It did not get all the different shades of the yellow. There's a lot of clipping.
And like the texture of the actual flower, right? If you had shown me this almost by itself, because I don't know the flower, I could have guessed that this might be like over sharpened. But funnily enough, I do see like the textures here. It's just with how the exposure worked on the Samsung, it was lost. So interesting there. Do not know what that color is. What that flower is.
Best colors, didn't clip as much, captured all those different shades.
Oh, so much more detail
there. So well done, Apple, with this shot. So first up, an ultra wide shot, and they both do a very...
Yeah, this looks amazing on both. For ultra wide, I would say ultra wides in general are usually pretty far behind like the quality you get on main sensors these days, unfortunately. My cat is like looking at me while she's like cleaning herself up, and she's like, why are you talking to yourself, you freaking moron? Yeah, so both look great. There's absolutely no way I could tell the difference here. Even if you could argue that maybe the sky or the sea was better on either one in terms of like more true to life, I think the differences are so marginal and so subjective in this case that it doesn't really matter. Both do get like this background, I don't know, island or the other side of the coast, right? If the coast goes around like this, like a sea, very well. So there isn't that much lost. If I zoom in, you can see even a little bit of like how the trees are there on the iPhone. You cannot see that quite as well on the Samsung, but maybe you could argue you could see like this part better on the Samsung. So yeah, both images are pretty much absolutely equal here.
Very good job. I think the iPhone has the edge here. It has more true to life colors. Now onto our 1x cameras. So both of the main cameras here both look very good. Lots of detail there. No complaints. Capturing a lot of the different shades of the cloud there. But it's when we then start to get into our zoom cameras. So 5x optical zoom cameras. Both of them here. Again, looking very similar, very close.
I'm really interested in who is gonna give the edge here, because I definitely have a preference. I have a suspicion that we might not agree.
There's a little bit more noise with the iPhone, and then when you take it up from the 5x to the 10x optical zoom, this is where the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, I think, has a slight advantage.
Okay, let us actually like zoom in here. There is a lot of weirdness here, and this is what happens when you cannot accept the image being ever so slightly soft. I will give Samsung actually some credit that I think that whatever algorithm they apply to deal with the noise on the iPhone, right, actually works pretty well. When it comes to the actual island though, right, for one, that tint of like blue over it, the haze looks really bad. There's a lot of like, when we actually look at real detail, right, you can see like the little boats there, like, well, you could argue, let me get up to there. Okay, there is a little bit more detail on the Samsung here, but then when we get to the actual like little forest here that's like growing up to, on the mountain or the very big hill, it looks so much better on the iPhone. Yes, it's softer, but man, this looks so much better on the iPhone. I don't even know what to say, like, because I fully understand that I do prefer the C as well on the Samsung here, and I will actually admit that, for example, when you look at the little yacht here in the background, it looks better than on the iPhone. So this is probably from Samsung using a slightly larger 5x zoom camera, right? Because the iPhone has a wider aperture, f2.8 versus Samsung's f3.4, which helps it in low light to compensate for the smaller sensor size than on Samsung. But Samsung is definitely leveraging the fact that it's 50 megapixel and a little larger sensor here quite well for sharpness, not though for color.
It's coming out with a little less noise compared to the iPhone. So I like the shot in the diner because they are close here, but again, it comes down to the white balance, getting this more correct on the iPhone. That pink should look just how it looks here. It's a little off with the Samsung. The Samsungs are also a little too bright for my liking, a little bit of oversaturation taking place.
Yep.
And I find there's a bit more detail retained.
Yep, like look at the actual like texture of the seats. Right, you can actually see like a little bit of like the small creases that you would expect from like this artificial material. I don't know if it's plastic or some kind of like, no, it's not supposed to be faux leather. It's right, but when you look here with the way it brought up the colors, right, made it like extra shiny almost. There's like no detail left here. Like, and you can also see the difference in the way it like treats the white balance. And also just look at the lines here, right? You can see that this was helped a little, right, by the actual algorithm. This is not natural detail. This is almost like drawn in. While on the iPhone, you have like this basically slightly softer, but basically perfect curve. This is what actual photography, like this is how you get way better images in photography. If this is your baseline with a little editing, if those had the same color reproductions, which by the way also like look at the HDR here with how Samsung like deals with like the Coca-Cola sign and the details inside the fridge. While on the iPhone, you get actual details inside the fridge. You have the nice, like, this is how a Coca-Cola sign usually looks like. And then also the details on the on like the posters in the background and stuff. It looks all so much better on the iPhone. When I actually looked at the images in overall white, it's not bad by any means, but yeah, there's a big difference in detail here.
The iPhone photo here compared to the Samsung. Optical zoom cameras again, so 5 times. They are very close here. We don't see too.
Oh man, the HDR handling on the iPhone is better. I don't know, is there more detail on the Samsung image? I wouldn't be surprised. The Coca-Cola sign, there's more like grainy noise here on the iPhone as part of the reflection. Yeah, I would say pretty typical thing seems to be in terms of the 5x comparison is that Samsung retains a little bit more detail, while the iPhone deals a lot better with color. It's actually difficult to say. From this, I prefer the iPhone, but if you like force me to like do any kind of specific zoom and get all the detail I wanted, let's look at the rules of the bar here, right? Establishing displays, establishing in displays during the prohibition era. Yeah, there's more detail on the Samsung here.
Too much of a difference in the white balance as we've seen in the other shots. A little more correct with the iPhone again. I do like some of the details that I see with the iPhone, and the Samsung shot also very good. So both of them here, almost a draw. If I've got to pick one, it would probably be the iPhone again.
Yeah, I agree with him. I think that because obviously I'm not posting images for like perfect detail online, I do prefer the overall iPhone image here. Though again, this like rules of the bar sign is probably the best example of how the Samsung does actually maintain better detail.
Color, but only just. One more zoom shot, and this time it is 10 times zoom on both of them. So that's hard
this
to
is where Samsung should win, because again, this is really good lighting situation. They do have the larger sensor, the higher resolution. Again, that bluish tint that is covering everything is really, really unpleasant. The detail level. This is actually pretty interesting, because the detail on the guy on is this a jet ski? Is pretty like similar, right? And I guess this is from the iPhone's better image stabilization. But when you look at the parts that were completely still, you see that Samsung has a little bit more detail in them, though partially those details look a little bit over sharpened and not just quite like naturally retained. But I will give this to Samsung just for the way like the water looks. I think the fact that it avoids the grainy noise on the iPhone here gives it an overall better look, even though I hate the bluish tint on the background.
still half optical, and when you crop in, you can see that it's the Galaxy S24 Ultra that does look the best here. Slightly sharper, more details. I think it has the best zoom camera, well, at least in daylight. With this ultra-wide shot, again, they're looking very similar, and it's the Samsung that has a slightly narrower field of view, slightly wider with the iPhone.
Yeah, it's like 1.6 to its main camera. The iPhone is actually was 0.5.
But if you look at the details in the shadows, HDR, I think, is just a bit better with the S24 Ultra versus...
I understand this. This is highly subjective, because when you actually look at like even like the stones here, this is super comparable. I understand that like in the trees, those trees look a little bit like brighter than they do on the iPhone. I've always found a little bit more contrast to be a little more pleasing. And this is, for example, why I've been critical on iPhones in the past by overdoing it with contrast. For example, my old iPhone 13 Pro Max and even the 14 Pro Max that followed them, I think they had not the proper HDR handling, even though the hardware definitely was there. But what Samsung is doing here, I honestly do not like that much. It makes everything look a little too samey, while this actually gives it a little bit more edge. But again, those images, we've talked about it with the last ultra wide, they're so similar in output quality. I have a hard time picking a winner here. I guess my main point would be what is more true to life, but even that is like not that important. Also, just as a small extra detail, right? When we talked about the zoom cameras, right? And I praised Samsung for dealing better with noise. You can see that when it comes to cameras that are actually pretty similar in terms of detail, whereas the Samsung's 5x sensor is larger than iPhone's. With the ultra wides, because they are very similar, Apple's algorithms just chooses to treat the water differently, right? It accepts a little bit more noise in order to give you way more detail about like how the waves move and stuff like that. While on Samsung, this looks almost like a completely quiet sea, and you can actually see from the distance from that person on the jet ski to like the island, you can see that those images are not so far apart in time that would justify that difference in like sea behavior. So yeah, very different takes on it, and highly subjective in that regard. By the way, neither is here completely true to life, just to be completely upfront.
This is where things get really interesting. That's low light now, photography. So you can see with the
low light photography is a difficult thing to judge. I found, because I see that a lot of reviewers tend to say, oh, this is the default like period of time that it took, right? But then because the iPhone favors quick image capture in order to reduce like imperfections from shaking hands and stuff like that. It also tries to keep night mode a little bit more night than day, right? So what I found, and this is a problem that SuperSaf often has, is that the iPhone usually captures like a night mode image in around 1, 2, maybe 3 seconds, while a lot of Android phones will like start at 3 seconds, but then often have you like capture an image for 5 seconds and stuff like that. And reviewers do not do a great job in actually comparing like time matched photos between how long it took to capture an image on the iPhone versus how long it took to capture the same image in Galaxy or Pixel. This is my personal pet peeve with a lot of reviewers, and I can see a little bit from this image. I know from my iPhone 15 Pro Max that it can capture more detail in such a situation, especially because there is light actually coming from the building and from and from the lamp next to it. Yeah, I kind of assumed that this was captured in like 1 second on the iPhone, like 3 seconds on the Galaxy or something like that.
The Samsung, it does capture more details with that double tree sign by Hilton. But look at the sky, it's purple. So overall it is the best shot, but that white balance is off a little bit. Now with the 5x optical shots on both of them, you can see again the Samsung has pulled ahead, and this time...
By the way, also, like, I've talked about this before, right? The iPhone is, like, known for this, some Androids call this a piss filter, right? Actually, look, which one is way warmer, and look at the sky before that, which one was purple, and which one was actually dark blue. So, yeah, don't come at the iPhone for being the artificial one.
White inside the lobby there. With this shot here, there is a big difference. Look at the grass. There's more details with the iPhone. The white balance is here more correct with the iPhone. The building should be a warm white. The sky looks better with the iPhone. It's second place.
Also, like, look at the detail of the house, right? I wanted to say just look at the top, but it's across the entire thing. It's really not even close. And then, of course, the grass. Once again, that blue tint that Samsung tries to do. This is what I'm trying to say. With those complicated new algorithms that are partially AI enhanced, it's actually harder than ever to predict how a photo will exactly come out if it's wrong, right? On the iPhone, I would argue it's so right in most regards that you can say that, oh, some of those things are like typically iPhone in how they're processed. But this, I wouldn't expect Samsung to take this kind of image usually. I would say this is probably a lighting scenario where it really struggled, but then still tried to capture the image and did basically a poor job with it.
The Samsung with this low light shot. And the final night shot, this is again very close at first glance, but when you do crop in, take a look at the leaves on that tree. It's in the far left there. You can see that it's just better exposed with the iPhone, a little clearer. It's almost a bit too bright with the Samsung. So
yeah, this makes me wonder how you actually captured those images, though.
Yeah, it was again the iPhone. So quickly recapping my findings here. I think the vlog footage, this went to the Samsung. It had better skin tones, better exposure. The iPhone was slightly overexposed. The stability was also very good, close between the two there. And speaking of stability, I think with zoom low light video, it was more stable with the iPhone. Less tremors, less shaking and low light. The iPhone handled colors better, more true to life, better white balance, handled the bright flowers a lot better. Portrait shots looked better with the iPhone. Low light, well, very close. I think the edge with a lot of those shots went to the iPhone. The selfies with the S24 Ultra I thought were the best, and zoom shots during the day, the Samsung took that. And the Samsung also has one trick up its sleeve. It has 8K video.
Yeah, this is not a trick for me. Like, it makes like I would just capture at that point 4K ProRes. That would give me far more detail than 8K. It would far better justify its large image file, its large video files, and it would make it far easier for me to edit stuff afterwards. So I didn't actually write down much with the video. With TechTablets, it's pretty simple. The iPhone wins across most categories for me. I could add ultra wide is a tie. Right, so there's more positive on my list for Samsung, but Samsung does capture better zoom footage across both photos and videos in good lighting conditions, whereas in low light the iPhone wins across most categories, as I said in the beginning. So now this was pretty one-sided in my opinion. Let's see if this is repeated in SuperSaf's video, and I haven't actually seen his video yet, so let's see.
What's up guys, Saf here on SuperSaf TV, and welcome to the SuperSaf style camera comparison, the one you've all been waiting for, the Samsung Galaxy S24.
This is cinematic mode. The iPhone destroys it. Oh my god, why would you start? This has to be a problem with like pre-release software. The iPhone like this looks 4 generations apart. This is the kind of problem I would expect to happen from an S20, not even like an S21. This is a software issue. Or it's focusing on something different. Like, I mean, look, the detail is right, the cutoffs are right, the colors are more right on the iPhone, and the skin tones, do I need even to talk about it? Like, this is like such an ass whooping. I refuse. If I were a Samsung fanboy and saw this as an intro, I would probably have an aneurysm.
Images, low light. You guys know the drill. Let's do it. We're going to kick off with the images, and after taking hundreds of pictures with both devices, from the primary cameras, as always, it is very, very close and good light. Both have excellent detail and a very, very good dynamic range. Now, there were certain situations where I did find that the iPhone did have better dynamic range. You can see in this example.
Yeah, I think this has actually been like Smart HDR5 really has been a game changer. Which, by the way, Smart HDR5 is like one of those like anti-consumer things about Apple, right? Because they do have like an A16 processor iPhone 15 that gets Smart HDR5, but then the A16 on the iPhone 14 Pro, which is actually also has like the same GPU cores, the same memory configuration, stuff like that, you will find that it doesn't get it. While I've complained about it in the past, I've almost come to the conclusion that Smart HDR5 universally works worse on the iPhone 15 versus the iPhone 15 Pros, and it seems to be better optimized for the A17 chip. Now, overall, I would say Smart HDR5 is still a better algorithm, and it deserves to be ported to the iPhone 14 Pro, but I would argue it won't work as well on the 14 Pro, even with the same sensor and like the same optics as the 15 Pro, because it simply does not have the A17 Pro chip.
Here, if you look towards the highlight areas of the building, the iPhone has maintained those better compared to the S24
Is this
Ultra.
like already a category? No, this is
that it shoots at 24 megapixels by default. Keyword there is default. So when we do compare these side by side and go in 100%, you are going to be able to get more detail on the iPhone 15 Pro Max compared to the S24 Ultra at default. Now, the S24 Ultra, of course, does have a high resolution camera. So it goes in 2 steps. You can go either at 50 megapixels, which matches the 48 megapixels of the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And here you can see that with both images, you can get lots more detail when you shoot at those high resolutions. Now, with the S24 Ultra, of course, you can go all the way up to 200 megapixels, and that's going to give you way more detail. This works best in environments that are well lit, so outdoors in good light. But again,
the problem with 200 megapixels though is like, wait, what kind of image did he took with the iPhone? He just saying 48 megapixels. So 48 megapixel between like still like JPEG and Pro RAW is a little different. There is more detail, especially when it comes to like different color situations. Like he zoomed in further. I don't fully know why on the Samsung. Regardless, I do admit that the Galaxy definitely has more detail here. However, the detail that comes from the 200 megapixel mode, when it comes to switching to 200 megapixels, the impact it has on like performance, it's not really historically worth it. I don't know if the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 maybe changes that drastically, but on the iPhone I found that yeah, Pro RAW capture does use more time than regular capture, right? But the regular capture is so fast on the iPhone that even being 2 times slower is not really a problem. Now Samsung that has improved its capture speed with the S24 generation, so it remains to be seen what the actual like usability difference is, but I found that it makes historically way more sense to keep the iPhone in a higher resolution capture mode than it has with Samsung's with their 100 or 200 megapixel cameras.
Well lit, so outdoors in a good light. But again, it is nice to have that option there to be able to shoot at full 200 megapixels. Right, now low light from the primary cameras. Now things were close in some situations like here, but when it did come to some tricky situations like this one where we've got some light coming in from the background, I did find that the iPhone does tend to balance things better compared to the S24 Ultra when you're using night mode. This indoor low light shot, the S24 Ultra, really struggling here.
By the way, I've seen it like as a comment, right? Samsung can do better with camera software. There's been like when I looked at this video before downloading, I found that like the number one comment was like about Samsung needing a software update because this is pre-release software. It doesn't seem to be on top anymore. Also weird way the way it like structures it. This has way more likes, but this is on top. Well, I guess because he liked it. Yeah, this image is like this to me is like why I've said that to me with the TechTablets comparison being primarily in good lighting conditions, right? With like basic the difference with like capturing something with the ocean or the sea, right? Or even a big lake is you don't just get the light from above, but you also get all the light reflected from down below. This is almost ideal conditions to capture a lot of detail because you really have, unless there is like an intensity of lens flares and like basically the glare from the sun, you really don't get better conditions than that in natural environments to get a lot of detail. While if you're working in low light, you see which one wins, right? And I would like argue this is like, oh my god, this is like an original pixel night side photo. This is a pre-release software bug. I refuse to believe that Samsung has degraded so much. Look, this is autofocus. This has artifacts, right? And it's like super blurry, barely like anything is in focus, maybe like the robot's eyes. And then on the iPhone you get the perfect colors, the better contrast, the real focus, the detail both in the front and the back, and then just the environmental lighting with this like terrible purple hue, while the iPhone retains a very naturalistic like dark gray lighting. This is like almost like dumb camera to smartphone level transition.
Because on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, when you are shooting in low light, it really brightens up the scene so you can actually compose the shot nicely. With the S24 Ultra, you are pretty much shooting blind, as you can see in this example.
Yeah, this is I'll just go out of my way. I'm sorry, low light iPhone win. Because look, it's not even funny how good the main sensor is now in low light, by the way. You have like, by the way, with what little exposure it did time-wise. By the way, let us quickly move back like 10 seconds. And how long did it take to capture the image? Okay, 3 seconds on both. Or was the iPhone 4 seconds? Did I miss it? No, it's 3 seconds on both. Okay, so at least this was matched, right? In his previous videos, he often gave scenarios where the iPhone, as I said before, where the iPhone took like 1 second and then like this took 3 seconds, and then he presented the Samsung as being better. Or even the iPhone sometimes won, even though it used like far less time in order to capture the image. So yeah, but just the shooting experience is so much better on the iPhone. That real world preview almost. Well, here, like, and then even the sky, right? The sky has been historically not really Apple's focus, right? They don't have like the what does Pixel call it? The astrography. Doesn't matter mode, right? But it's like you basically put your phone in a tripod, let it sit there, let it expose for a long while, and then it does a little bit extra special magic beyond just image aggregation to really bring up the skies. That it works either great if you have a camera that is really good at light capture even from small sources, obviously if you have a nice DSLR for example, but then on smartphones with obviously far smaller sensors you do need a few more tricks. And somehow in just 3 seconds of exposure, right, the iPhone is sharp, right? It has actually found the focus. It has brought out the detail in the house. It has actually a little bit of detail inside, right? It's not a lot, but you can see that there's like a door here. Here, you cannot really tell anything. And to just add insult to incredible injury because of how far apart those images are, by the way, once again, I want to cover that grass actually looks grassy on iPhones. There's a little bit of texture here. And iPhone does not have a disgusting purplish hue across its entire image. Look at the sky. I'm not even kidding here, right? The iPhone does not usually focus on like bringing out individual stars. Yet here across the entire image, the iPhone has brought up basically every star there is from every Galaxy ever. And then Samsung, which is called a Galaxy phone, apparently does not bother to properly display additional galaxies. That's a joke, by the way. I know how stars work, but this is so profound. This is embarrassing for Samsung.
Example. It also takes longer for the S24 Ultra to capture the shot compared to the iPhone 15 Pro.
Ah, okay, good, nice. Also, by the way, a lot of things, even when the iPhone, for example, in this scenario, both took like 3 seconds, the post-processing will usually be very short to non-existent on the iPhone, or it will load an almost like perfect image, but then it will get ever so slightly sharper. And then with Samsung and especially Pixel with their terrible tensor chips, you will wait a little longer for the image once it's been captured to actually display properly in like your album.
Pro Max, and this can sometimes result in not as sharp of an image because it's very difficult to hold your hands still for many seconds, especially when it's so cold like it is right now in the UK. So for low light, I would have to give the edge to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now with the ultra-wide cameras, very, very close. I think both have excellent detail and dynamic.
Yeah, and this is where like small details in dynamic in like HDR differences come out, right? Where the iPhone has like this beautiful dark, slightly darker blue sky, but then it has a little bit more shadows here for the trees. It basically comes down to preference.
Dynamic range. Now, usually I do find that the Samsung devices do have better dynamic range, but this time it was very, very close. I think Apple has definitely...
Also, like, just in general, I don't know. There's always a tad of purple that I now see in Samsung's images. Maybe I'm getting paranoid.
Some software improvements to the ultra-wide camera. Because in some situations, like this one, I did find that...
Oh, that's what's an
highlight
ultra-wide
details
shot.
were better
Interesting.
maintained on the iPhone 15 Pro Max compared to the S24 Ultra. For low light from the ultra-wide
by the way, like, this is small, like, Apple apologia on my behalf, for me in this case. It comes down to Apple keeping the same camera hardware, almost only basically changing the 3x to a 5x telephoto on the Pro Max. I think that Apple really saw the continuous problems that they had, like some HDR issues, some lens flare issues, right? And they said, like, look, we have this camera hardware from the 14 Pro Max. We know from internal testing that it can work really well, but for an overall pleasing algorithms, we have accepted those problems. Now we have a much better processor in the A17 Pro with a better image signal processor. We have even more memory that we can give this chip. It's even more efficient. So what can we do with this, right? And I think there was a compromise here. I mean, sure, it also helps with saving money, definitely. But the idea of we have this hardware, we know it works, it might not be perfect, we could give the ultra-wide a larger sensor, we could make the main sensor like almost a full 1 inch, something like that, right? But the fact that they took this hardware and continuously improved it, because look at this image, right? I mean, sure, it's not perfect, and you can see that the sensor definitely isn't huge, because the amount of detail isn't great on either one. But look at this unnaturally warm hue in the background. This is what you would expect from like a Smart HDR3 or Smart HDR4 iPhone. Not any more with Smart HDR5. That purplish, completely unnatural hue in the sky, right? On the iPhone, a beautiful blue gradient from very bright blue, where the lights of the city meet the sky, right? To really, really dark blue, where it basically escapes the light pollution. This is an image that is a smartphone image, right? It's by no means perfect, and you can capture something so much better with a DSLR. But this actually looks good and usable. Well, this looks like 2 generations behind.
Cameras, I would say it was very, very close, looking at multiple examples.
Again, this... Look, what is this? I thought this might be just a zoom camera, maybe the new 5x shooter. They haven't fully optimized the software. They have no excuse on the ultra wide. The ultra wide has been there for years and years. What is that purple doing here? It's not just purple. It's purple and pink, right? It's
These were great, and I can't really pick a winner between the two.
Yeah, those both look terrible. The iPhone has a natural sky here. Like, come on.
Now, both ultra-wide cameras do have autofocus, which means that you can focus in very close and get macro photos, and both do really, really well. Now, you can focus in closer with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, but I do find that the S24 Ultra processing is a bit more pleasing.
I found that the iPhone almost tries to sometimes zoom in on way too small of an area, and I thought that like the strength of an ultra wide image is usually that it captures everything in focus, just that it sacrifices a little bit of overall detail for it. Because when you actually see, the iPhone actually like zoomed in here, but then everything else is bokeh depth of field blurry, right? While here the overall focus area is way larger, which, I mean, sure, if you really wanted to focus only on this is where the iPhone would win. But I do find that Samsung has found a nicer balance, and I almost think that it could be an issue because the ultra wide on the iPhone is actually wider, so it might actually have more problems dealing with that than the Samsung camera.
And I do prefer the macro shots that generally come out of the S24 Ultra compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Right, now let's look at zoom, because this I know a lot of you guys are interested in. So the iPhone 15 Pro Max has a 5x telephoto camera. The S24 Ultra has a 3x telephoto camera, and now it has also a 5x periscope telephoto camera. The S23 Ultra from last year had a 10x periscope zoom camera, so this has changed. And let's see what the results are.
This is actually where I will give Samsung some credit for keeping the 3x, while also completely obliterating them for keeping the 3x, so please bear with me. My problem with the 3x is not its presence. My problem with the 3x is that it's an ancient sensor paired like a 10 megapixel, really small, paired with really not like up-to-date optics. It has a nice wide aperture relatively for a zoom camera. Granted, the lower the zoom, the easier it is to give it a nice wide aperture. So it's not like the iPhone is like technologically inferior. It's just that it's easier to pair a 3x with a wider aperture. This is actually seen on the 5x, where Apple does have a wider aperture than Samsung. But the 3x, my problem is that it takes up space on a device that, in order to better compete with other Android competitors, could have actually used that space to finally give the main sensor, the main camera, a larger sensor, and or the ultra wide, or make the 5x even better than it already is, the new camera, or give it a slightly larger battery. So my problem with the 3x is, as nice as it's to have, because I've always advertised that my favorite zoom range is about 4x. So technically, with a 3x camera, I can still zoom in a little and get a 4x image, right? While with 5x, I either don't get the 4x image I want, or I have to move further away to turn what would be a 4x image into a 5x image. I have found that because of how well the image stabilization works on the iPhone, that moving away is actually not as big of a problem. But in theory, if Samsung had a really nice, really ambitious, like large sensor, high resolution, nice optics 3x camera, they would be far above Apple. But just from a usability perspective, I think it's so asinine, and my only theory that makes sense to me why they did it is because they were afraid that in markets like India, that are very, very conscious of like exact tech specs, right? Like how many cameras does your phone have? What is the resolution of your main camera, right? I think Samsung kept it because they didn't want to deal with the press release that said Samsung moves from 4 back cameras to 3, right? And this is why they kept the 3x basically out of pride.
First stage that you have on the iPhone is 2 times zoom. Now, this isn't using a special lens, it's just cropping into the middle part of the sensor. You can also do this on the S24 Ultra, and results are quite similar in good light. Now, the next step for the S24 Ultra is 3 times zoom, because you do have that dedicated optical zoom camera. And when we compare this to the iPhone 15 Pro Max, it is using digital zoom at 3 times. So you do get more detail with the S24 Ultra.
Do you?
Now, if you continue on to up to 4.9 times zoom, then the S24 Ultra once again is going to give you better zoom, because it's going from 3 to 4.9. Whereas in the iPhone, you're going from 1 to 4.9. So that particular zoom range between 3 and...
Yeah, but I would argue that anything be above 4.5, just use the 5x, right? I think that around 4x, you can make the argument. 4.9 is just ridiculous. But I get the point. Just from a purely mathematical perspective, I have to agree.
Ultra. Now, when we switch to 5 times zoom, this is where the optical zoom cameras of both devices kick in. And I think both do an excellent job in good light, as you can see here. Now, we can extend the zoom to really see how well these do. And we can go to 10 times on both devices. Now, both devices...
Okay, I'll write in my Samsung has slightly more detail in good light zoom. I have no problem admitting that, and I hope that it's his statement too.
Have slightly different focal lengths, so even though you are at 5 times or 10 times, they will be slightly different. But here, although things are quite close, I do think that the S24 Ultra does have slightly sharper results. Now, if we do extend to the max that the iPhone 15 Pro Max offers, Max, which is 25 times zoom, and we compare that to the S24 Ultra, you can see that although both are doing well, the S24 Ultra does have more detail, especially if you look towards those solar panels. I'm assuming because Samsung has been doing extended zoom for a longer period of time, it has better software algorithms. With the S24 Ultra, you can also extend all the way up to 100 times space zoom. Now, how good this is, we're gonna have to compare it to the S23 Ultra, which goes from that 10x periscope zoom camera. I know you guys want to see that comparison, and I am working on that, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. I'm also working on a hands-on comparison between the S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max, looking at all of the differences, so you're not going to want to miss it. Now, zoom in good light is all well and good, but how do these compare when it comes to zoom in low light? So using the primary cameras initially, we are going to go to 2 times zoom to see which one of these processes them better. Now, we are going to have to blow these up to 200% to really see the differences. And you can see that the iPhone 15 Pro Max has done a better job with that digital zoom at 2x. Now, if we go to 3 times zoom, remember, this is where that optical zoom camera of the S24 Ultra kicks in. And when we look at this and blow this up 200%, you can see that we do have more detail now on the S24 Ultra. And this is going to continue until we're at about 4.9 times zoom. When we go to 5 times, you can see that both of the 5 times optical zoom cameras have kicked in, and we have pretty good results on both. But when we go to 10 times, once again, you can see that difference in focal length. The iPhone 15 Pro Max
also just the colors, right? Look, it took the green tint that is definitely around him, right? And it just applied it without any understanding of the person he is. He also looks bloated here because the texture of his clothes is completely lost, right? So it basically looks like it's protruding like from a fat stomach, which is not the case. This is just normal, like basically like slightly baggy shirt, and the same goes for his pants. And then obviously you do have like the white that actually looks white, just slightly warm on his sneakers. This is why the iPhone goes with like the default slightly warmer tone, and that is to avoid just randomly picking a color from the environment and believing that it's the white balance for everything. The white balance on iPhones, in my opinion, is only comparable to the white balance on Pixels, and both actually deal with it pretty differently, with the iPhone by default going a little warmer, with the Pixel by default going a little cooler. But I do believe that those cooler versus warmer is just a difference in how the algorithms work. I do believe that both the Pixel and the iPhone are actually really good at understanding which white in the image is actually white, which the Samsung has not proven to me whatsoever.
It seems to have more detail, and it's a better overall image with some more contrast. Now, if you go all the way to 25 times zoom, this is even clearer that the iPhone is doing better with zoom in low light. The S24 Ultra does go all the way to 100 times, even in low light, but I wouldn't even bother doing it in this situation. Unless you want to take pictures of the moon, you're not really going to be using that one.
And you can actually get from that image that you just saw with the incredibly bad looking purple background, now imagine what it actually does with the moon, because if it had the necessary detail level to capture the moon, it wouldn't have the same problems here at 5 or 10x in low light. The reason why it's actually good at capturing the moon is because it does have dedicated algorithms at recognizing the moon, basically redrawing it for you, and then giving you the image. It's not actually good at capturing the moon. Anybody with a nice DSLR, but with a lens system that doesn't actually zoom in too far, knows that even a really large sensor can have problems capturing the moon. Obviously, with a little zoom, it becomes pretty easy. But on smartphones with far smaller sensors on average, especially once we go down to the 1 by, I believe, around 2.5 or 3 inch sensors, right? Versus like a full 1 inch sensor is actually like microscopic almost in comparison to like real DSLR sensors that in terms of area would be like 7 times larger. I believe it's about 7.5 times larger than a full 1 inch sensor, a full frame sensor, right? So imagine what you get if you have like an over 2.5 times smaller sensor than a 1 inch sensor in the form of like the zoom zoom camera. You have no chance if you don't apply a lot of algorithmic work, a lot of computational photography. There's just no chance for it to compete.
100 times zoom in low light. So for zoom in good light, I'd have to give the win to the S24 Ultra with that dedicated 3x optical zoom camera. But for low light, I'd have to give it to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now let's look at portraits because things are very interesting. So in this example, I do prefer the colors on the S24 Ultra. The iPhone 15 Pro Max is a little bit washed out. But in terms of edges and the overall picture, both are doing excellent. Now, with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, when you do take a portrait image at 1x in good light, it is going to give you a 24 megapixel image. So
again, this is the kind of scenario that, for example, this, and by the way, I've actually been fair with like the image on the portrait mode in the TechTablets video. I've said like I almost don't believe that portrait mode that he had shown, and the same thing applies here, which is usually if you were to capture an image such as this on the iPhone, you would probably move an inch or two to maybe avoid direct light where it might hit the sensor and result in you capturing a worse image. I do agree that the iPhone looks slightly washed out, though the detail level is actually better on the iPhone in most things here. So yeah, this is not too aesthetically pleasing on either, but like with the skin tones being better on the Samsung, stuff like that, yeah, I would give it to Samsung in this particular image, if this one particular image was actually representative.
You are going to be able to crop in much further on the iPhone 15 Pro Max compared to that of the S24 Ultra.
Which, by the way, like we got some fake rumors before the S24 Ultra launch that said it would be able to capture, I believe, at 25 megapixels natively. Basically, like going from like 200 megapixels to 50 to 25 to 12.5 or something like that, right? So that would be closer to that in-between step.
Devices also let you take portraits at...
No, and this is why I said it. That previous image was hardly representative. Skin tones, no, much better on the iPhone. Again, there is a slightly purplish tint here that I see, and now I don't know if I'm going insane or if I have like maybe some settings wrong on my MacBook because I don't have True Tone on. So yeah, iPhone wins this image. The grass, this reminds me of the Galaxy S3 days. Yeah, I know that's a long time ago, not 20 years ago, which would have guessed from the S24 branding. And that was around when the iPhone 5 was also out. And my cousin, who's slightly older than me, she always loved me taking photos of her because I'm really good at taking photos. And we would go to the park, and she had the Galaxy S3. At that point, she was really devoted to Samsung. Then nowadays, her entire family's iPhone. And she would capture an image, show it to me, and say like, "Oh, look how green the grass is." And I would look at the Samsung, right? This was also at the time, not only when the images on Samsungs were completely oversaturated, thankfully that got better, but also the screens, right? This was the early OLED days before the Galaxy S6, Galaxy S7, where I would say OLEDs finally got really good. And you got like that oversaturated green from the image on top of the oversaturated green from the display, and what you got was like this grass, like it was magical, like it was glowing like something from World of Warcraft, right? And I just found it fascinating how she looked at this and thought that this was aesthetically pleasing, while I had like her phone in my hands. And then I basically was peeking out of it and looking at the actual grass that we had just captured an image of. And I'm like, that's not how it looks at all. And then on the iPhone 5, much better calibrated LCD screen and much better camera overall as well.
2x, which is using the middle part of the sensors. And I think both do excellent, as you can see from these examples here. Now, the S24 Ultra by default has options to take portraits at 1, 2, 3 times as well as 5 times. With the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you do not have an option to take portraits at 3 times. However, you can go into the image after you've taken it and then add the portrait effect. You can also do this on the S24 Ultra. So in this example,
you can also do that, but I found that historically the iPhone has been like this. There's a reason why this feature basically only came by default with like the iPhone 15 generation, with like post capture like portrait mode applying. It's because it seems to be capturing really much better data there. Also, like, yeah, this is one specific zoom range at which the iPhone does not capture portraits, at least not
do take
natively.
A standard iPhone 15 Pro Max image and add the portrait and compare it to the portrait image from the S24 Ultra. You can see that both are doing good. We do have differences in color, which we'll talk about in a second, but the S24 Ultra does give you a sharper image thanks to that 3 times optical zoom. Now let's test out portraits at 5 times, which I think is my new favorite optical zoom length for portraits.
Yep.
And you can see that both
I found that too. It's so freaking good. They're like 120 millimeter equivalent. It's I've historically, like, I don't own a DSLR anymore. I gave my old one away, my Nikon, and I had like, I don't actually fully remember because I got it relatively early in life, but it had like around 100 millimeter like top end like zoom. So it was like more of a portrait lens, and it was so freaking good for that. I mean, admittedly, it wasn't fully mine. I shared it with other family members and stuff. And I really loved it. And the iPhone 15 Pro Max is the first experience that I ever had that really reminded me of capturing like a proper portrait natively without even having to go into portrait mode at 5x. It's so good.
actually doing very good here. Now both do handle skin colors a little bit differently. I think this one is going to come down to your personal preference. But in this image, I'd say that the color of my top is better maintained on the iPhone. It's a bit more black. But the iPhone does tend to go for more of an orange look, which a lot of people I know don't like.
I mean, I understand that criticism. It's very easy, by the way, to correct that on the iPhone with photographic styles. Again, I know the Galaxy has like, what is it called? Ultra raw or something like that. But with the iPhone, it's really easy to capture Pro RAW. You get far better images. You don't get really any kind of compromises like this. But also here, it's like, I know it doesn't look orange, but it doesn't also look like his natural skin either. So
The S24 Ultra has gone more for a yellowish look.
exactly.
I'd say my actual skin tone is in between here.
Exactly.
But when we look at the edges, although both are doing excellent, take a look at some of the wisps of hair on the iPhone 15 Pro Max portrait. It's been able to still maintain those, and it looks a lot more realistic.
Which, by the way, and I know this is another diversion here, whisks of hair are really good somehow in like a human portrait mode, but it completely ignores the really like big white Twitter something. Yeah, it does basically for my cat what the Galaxy does to him, which it completely cuts off any kind of hair on top. You can actually see here, right where my mouse pointer is, that there's like a hair looking out from it. Exactly, there it is here actually. And you can see this and this and this. Is this one long beard hair? Yeah, it's looking out from here. I thought this might be an artifact. Also, like there's like a strand of the material from, and yeah, I wasn't wrong. There actually is a slightly purplish tint to this image. So yeah, iPhone win, absolutely.
Because of that reason. I'm not sure what software magic Apple are applying, but it's so good. Now, portraits in low light. So this is using the primary cameras.
Wait, what's going on?
I do prefer the S20.
Why does his face look photoshopped on? What's going on here?
For Ultra, because the iPhone 15 Pro Max has completely taken off my hair. It's kind of like hinting to me that, hey Saf, you're starting to recede quite a bit. Just get rid of the hair altogether. Thanks, Apple.
God,
The S24 Ultra
God, I
has
hope that
actually
never
maintained
happens
that.
to me. If the portrait mode ever does that to me, I think I would go insane.
That's much better compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now we can do...
Guys, those who are watching, please let me know, what do you actually think of this comparison? Do you think that my own reactions to this are accurate? Do you think it's fair? Do you think it's way too iPhone leaning?
the 2x portraits as well with both devices. Here I actually prefer the iPhone compared to...
I mean, there's no way you could not prefer the iPhone here. We've seen that shirt in other images. It's... that hoodie, by the way, I don't know why I didn't think of the word hoodie before. I'm sorry, it's really late. It is black or dark gray. It is not midnight blue as it is here. And you can actually see that with the way Samsung like tries to create an even image across like his persona, it tries to make his pants almost the exact same color as his hoodie. And then it tries to do the same with his beard, which is so fucking insulting. Yeah, I know, again, we can argue back and forth if the iPhone might be a tad too oranges. I know, too orangey. Yeah, I think I'll settle on orangey. And I know that people of color especially are hurt more by that, because obviously for me, giving me a slightly like more pinkish hue or something like that doesn't hurt me, makes me look a little healthier as a white guy. For him, maybe it looks a tad too much, right? And then, but this looks like it had an overhead light. This looks like a flash image.
To the S24 Ultra, which has overexposed things a little bit. Now we can take portraits with the 5x telephoto cameras of both devices, and here it's a clear win for the S24 Ultra. You've got a much...
I mean, you have an image that is almost not in focus on the iPhone. Like this is wrong.
Sharper result, and for some reason the iPhone 15 Pro Max really does struggle with portraits at 5x in low light. It straight up refused a few times, saying either use the flash or don't bother. So for low light portraits, I'd say the edge overall goes to the S24 Ultra. Now
What?
selfies, I think
Wait, how did he reach that conclusion? What? What? Is it because it has like 3x and 1 in that one last image? I'm sorry. I will say it's a back and forth, right? But it's an edge to the S24 Ultra. I have no idea how he came to that conclusion, except because those were the images that he captured. But he like he had like no comparison shot. This is what I really dislike about SuperSaf. It's like, guy, please show me like 3 images or something like that of basically the same scenario where you move a little to the left, a little to the right, and then give us almost like an average of the shots. It's not too dissimilar from how a graphics benchmark, right, is like run like 3 times or so in order to get a nice average. It's man, like the way he does stuff sometimes, it's
both take excellent selfies. We do have differences in skin color. In this one, I do prefer the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
Interesting. I would have guessed he would prefer this based on what he said before. I definitely prefer the iPhone here by a long shot, actually. But I kind of guessed that he might prefer the Samsung image. So interesting to know how it varies.
The iPhone 15 Pro Max is also a little bit wider. In this image, I think the iPhone 15 Pro Max does have some better dynamic range. It's boosted those shadows, but in doing so, it's made my beard look very gray. I mean, I've just dyed it, so, you know, thanks, Apple.
Oh yeah, because I actually wanted to say, wait, shouldn't his beard be gray, given that his usual hair is so gray? But no, he dyes his beard. That's actually fascinating.
For making it look gray. The S24 Ultra, on the other hand, has maintained colors on my top and my beard better compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. In this example, I think things are very close. I think both are doing a good job.
The iPhone wins this level of detail, but yeah, I would guess if the iPhone really did that to his beard, I agree.
Mode from the front-facing cameras of both devices. When you do this on the iPhone, it kind of crops in a little bit for some reason. But you can just take a regular selfie
and then transform it afterwards. I've noticed that too.
And both are doing really, really well overall. However, I do think the edges once again are better on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. You can see those wisps.
And I find that, like, I know that he does, like, what was this was like 5x portrait? No, this was. Yeah, like, this is what I find weird sometimes, because he has, like, a special portrait section, but he somehow didn't include, like, selfie portraits. It's a little weird.
Cameras of both devices. When you do this on the iPhone, it kind of crops in a little bit for some reason, but you can just take a regular...
He should really use some lip balsam that... his lips are dry as the desert. What do I prefer here? I think both images. This is what I've also said in the TechTablets video. The ultra wide and the selfie cameras are so close. I honestly don't think there's much value in trying to overanalyze which one is better. I think both are good enough.
Turn it into a portrait later, which I've done here, and both are doing really, really well overall. However, I do think the edges once again are better on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. You can see those wisps of hair. And the S24 Ultra, if you do look closely, has kind of cut.
Oh, I'm sorry. I opened my my AirPods while I was playing around with them.
My sunglasses a little bit as well. Now for selfies in low light, this is quite difficult to take because you have to really keep your hands still. I used both of my hands because it does take a longer shutter speed. Now in this example, although the iPhone is brighter, it's got a lot more noise. So
yeah, I would say both images are so unusable. I don't even know why bother. The selfie camera is like a 1 by 3.5 inch sensor or something like that on both. I believe the Samsung is a little larger, but then the iPhone has an f1.9 aperture versus Samsung's f2.2. So I believe on average, both as 12 megapixel cameras should be getting about the same amount of light. So it comes down to the algorithms, and then it just comes down to how it deals with a situation where there's basically no light at all, given how small the camera arrangement is. So yeah, both are complete garbage. At least the iPhone looks somewhat visible, but I wouldn't use either photo. I wouldn't even know what the artistic style is, because this looks like a hostage image. Also because he looks like so freaking sad somehow, but like the angle is bad. Everything about this image is bad.
So the S24 Ultra I would pick in this instance.
What? Why? Why would you pick any one? They both look like garbage.
Upper image overall. And although it's not as bright, it's not as noisy. Using the front-facing flash on both devices, again, the iPhone 15 Pro Max might appear to be brighter, but it's very, very noisy, so I do prefer the S24 Ultra. Now, before we move on to video, just...
okay, I agree with that on the last one.
The S24 Ultra now does have lots of AI features that you can use in post.
Wait, what?
So like you can do in the iPhone, on the S24 Ultra, you can now just select a regular image and turn it into a portrait image. You can also do things like remove reflections and shadows. But as well as that, you can actually go in and edit the picture further by selecting the subject, changing the position of it, the size of it. And I think my favorite thing is using AI to rotate an image and fill in the spaces. If you've got friends who can never take a straight image, this is going to be so useful. A lot of these features we have seen on the Google Pixel devices, but it's nice that we've now also got them on the S24 Ultra. Right, for video. Traditionally, when I go to do video...
Okay, I give him some credit for quickly mentioning it while also not trying to include it as some kind of like big part of the actual image capture experience. I do believe that this is like extremely artificial post-processing. I mean, it's literally AI, right? So I'm happy that he glossed over it for the most part. Well, also I think it's fair that he mentioned it in general. So no complaints here.
An easy win for the iPhone 15 Pro Max, but Samsung fans will be pleased to know that this year things were much closer. So when we're shooting in good light at 4K, things are very close. I think we've got excellent detail and dynamic range on both. I did really try to test the dynamic range by shooting in...
Again, the iPhone, usually known to have more lens flares. Guess which one has more lens flares? Again, purplish tint from a direct light source.
The sun in
There are big algorithmic issues here.
And I also tested using HDR on both devices, then exporting them out to SDR for this video. Once again, I think both are doing very good, especially from the primary and the ultra-wide cameras. Now, I would still give the edge to the iPhone 15 Pro Max because in other situations...
Yeah, it's not even close.
Such as from the selfie camera in particular.
I believe though, isn't the iPhone like doing at 30 FPS? Like, isn't it in actually capturing like 4K 60, but then using like those intermediate frames when you're capturing at HDR at least for like to actually get like that extra detail for dynamic range?
I do think it had better dynamic range. Also, you saw the cinematic video at the beginning, and once again, the colors were much better maintained on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, whereas things were getting very yellow on the S24 Ultra. Speaking of cinematic video, the iPhone 15 Pro Max also allows you to adjust things after you've taken the video. When you're using cinematic mode, you can't do this on the S24 Ultra. And you also...
And I actually will have to say that this is what makes, to me, cinematic mode even usable in the first place. Because cinematic mode, or whatever the equivalent is called on Samsung, it will always have issues, right? It's highly artificial. It's trying to work at like 8 megapixels at 60 FPS, and it's 30, right? It used to start at 1080 30, now it's 4K 30, right? And so it will have problems doing that, but if you cannot correct those problems, then that mode basically becomes useless. So this is when even I see comparisons where like the actual output for one specific section is pretty similar across devices. I have found that the iPhone's ability to edit them, and I actually don't really even like cinematic videos that much. I think they require way too much work afterwards. But with the iPhone's ability to actually edit them at all, right? This is what makes them at least somewhat usable
when using cinematic mode on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now, for low light, things were very close. I would say that they're the closest that they've ever been.
What is going on there?
I would still say that the iPhone is better in very dark.
I mean, is it even close? Like the iPhone, you can see this, you can actually see green. The sky is actually dark blue. You can see like the stars here.
Situations like you can see here.
I mean, it's not as close as he makes it out to be.
While on the topic of low light, both have excellent autofocus, as you can see. But when we do have low light, the iPhone does seem to be a little bit faster. And I think that is down to the dedicated LiDAR scanner.
I don't always know, because LiDAR scanner, yes, it helps, and it definitely helps in this specific scenario that he uses, because the object is pretty close up. But I've also found that the iPhone is generally better at like quick refocusing, also on objects that would be too far away for the LiDAR to help along. So I don't know if the LiDAR is always the thing that makes the difference, or the iPhone is just generally better at dealing with quick focus changes.
On the iPhone 15 Pro Max. For stabilization, I think at 4K both are excellent. I definitely cannot pick a winner between these two because both are very stable. And yes, guys, I know I run like a GTA character. That's just the way I run.
Okay? Yeah, okay.
Now, we do have action mode and super steady. So these will shoot at a slightly lower resolution, but they will give you much more.
I mean, just look at the trees in the background, right? You have like this absolutely unnatural like yellowish tint on them, the same one that actually like permeates throughout the entire glass here. The iPhone, like, not only does it appear a little sharper throughout, though it didn't do quite as great of a job really focusing on like parts of his jacket. You can really easily like slightly brighten up that video afterwards. It takes like a second of processing on the iPhone. This is a way better result. It's like,
now with both of these at default, it does use the ultra wide cameras, so 0.6 and 0.5. And as you can see, both once again do such a good job with stabilization. I really cannot pick a winner between these two. However, when we use action mode and super steady with the primary cameras, then the iPhone is more stable, as you can see here. This was a similar situation.
Yeah, that comes down to sensor shift image stabilization. The iPhone's image stabilization, I have actually found over the last couple of years, ever since the first generation of sensor shift image stabilization came to the 13 Pro Max, has been kind of like a low-key, like, killing blow almost in certain scenarios, even versus like phones with sometimes way larger sensors and stuff like that. That stabilization, for one, it enables that zero shutter lag experience where you don't actually just capture an image quickly, because contrary to public belief, a lot of phones can do that. That just comes down to how quick your processor is, and if you have a main series Snapdragon 8, you can do that. But usually the reason why phones don't allow you to capture something that quickly is because they do need a little bit of process time to actually make sure, oh, is everything in focus? How do we deal with the dynamic range here? And with how well the iPhone stabilizes, I believe the sensor shift image stabilization works around 5,000 times per second or something like that, versus more traditional OIS working at around 1,000 times. I have found that the iPhone is really confident in doing this. Like, yes, previously it had like HDR problems because it didn't give itself too much time to capture an image, but now somehow on the 15 Pro Max, it manages to stabilize itself, capture an image really quickly, and competently deal with HDR in that image. So yeah, it really, like, and not even next year, this year now in September, we're getting an iPhone 16 Pro with a 1x1.5 inch sensor, right? So it's a little larger than the 1x1.28 inch sensor that we have right now. And while, yeah, the difference isn't huge, and we do have other cameras with like full 1-inch sensors, this will be a really modern Sony sensor specifically optimized for HDR, now capturing even more light, like combined with an A18 Pro chip at that point, with even like a higher bandwidth memory, so dealing with a lot of data will become easier and stuff like that. I honestly fear that with the fact that the iPhone 15 Pro Max so decisively wins against the Galaxy S24 Ultra, if the S25 Ultra, and rumors actually point to that, if it actually keeps the same 1x1.33 inch sensor without major like optical changes, like it has an f1.7 aperture, the iPhone has an f1.78 aperture. If this is actually the case, the iPhone 16 Pro Max will pull away by so much. There is zero chance the S25 Ultra comes as close to the iPhone 16 Pro Max as even the 14 Pro Max, as the 24 Ultra does to the 15 Pro Max. That was a lot of numbers, and I apologize for that, but I just keep that in the back of my head because I see like the Ico 100 or whatever, like the Vivo phones and stuff like that, and I see that they like really do some nice job utilizing their 1-inch sensors. They just don't come close to the algorithms that Apple and Google have built. And now Samsung has to compete with those. And unfortunately, Samsung does now very little to like dramatically pull ahead in other areas like they used to. Like previously, One UI was way better than like MIUI, and even like the new HyperOS in general, I would say like has not changed that much. But now that those Chinese operating systems have matured a lot, now that those brands have gained more trust in the West, I honestly think the iPhone will be very, very fine. Apple can play a little bit with pricing around, and like people will be floored if Apple drops like the iPhone 16 pricing to $700 and the 16 Plus is $800. It would still be monumentally overpriced if you want like a phone that actually has 120 hertz. But guess what? Most people don't care about it. And then on the Pro phones, if Apple keeps actually even the same prices, doesn't even give the base 16 Pro more storage, for example, Apple will be still absolutely fine, because people will look at it and think, oh, Apple still didn't increase like base Pro pricing ever since the iPhone 10, despite all the inflation? Yeah, people will go nuts for that phone, especially if it also now has a larger screen, a processor with way better cooling, a larger, better cooled battery. It probably could pull ahead of the of Samsung devices in terms of charging speed. So this, I've actually said that on Twitter. It's the Galaxy S24 series, except for the fact that the S24 and 24 Plus finally have LTPO panels. This might be the least impressive generation technologically from Samsung, quite honestly, ever. Maybe the Galaxy S9 didn't improve much over the Galaxy S8. Maybe you can compare it to that. But the fact that the hardware is almost the same, it basically is like the iPhone 15 Pro Max camera hardware also didn't change a lot, right? But it's utilizing its A17 Pro really, really well for the changes here. Samsung does not have the same control over optimizing its algorithms for the new processor. This is probably how we are getting like that purple problem, right? It probably will take them 2 or 3 months to properly optimize everything for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And then it might get closer to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. But the rift is honestly so wide. I honestly see so very few changes over the S23 Ultra that I don't know if it will ever fully catch up. And for a phone that's coming out like 4 months later and by default costs $100 more, right? The iPhone is $1199 for 256 gigabytes. There's no 128 gigabyte model anymore, and this is $1299. So, and unlike the iPhone, right, they cannot even afford to go that much lower with pricing because it has like the S Pen and stuff like that. But I don't know if it was really smart for Samsung to like go with a titanium chassis that adds to pricing, go with keep the 3x telephoto instead of finally giving us a larger main sensor. I don't know. There's some weirdness going on that makes me honestly, I probably would choose like a OnePlus 12 right now over a Galaxy.
When we did some previous tests, so it looks like for stabilization, when it comes to the primary camera with the action mode, then the iPhone is better. Now the S24 Ultra does have the ability to shoot 8K video, something that the iPhone does not have. Now with the S23 Ultra as well as the S24 Ultra, we have much more usable 8K video compared to previous generations because it is not cropping in massively. This gives you so much detail, and it also gives you the ability to crop in further if you do want to.
Really? I don't see that much more detail. I see it handling light way worse than the iPhone.
Testing out the 5x zoom cameras on both devices for video. I did find that the S24 Ultra was sharper compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. And then testing these out in low light, the iPhone 15 Pro Max was brighter, but you did have more noise. Now we do have lots of Pro features for both devices. So with the S24 Ultra, you've got Pro video mode. So this is going to allow you to go in and really change all of your settings like white balance and ISO. On the iPhone 15 Pro Max, you will have to get an external app if you want to do something like this. But the iPhone 15 Pro Max.
By the way, I know that people like want to like really shit on the iPhone for that, but like there is a new app in town, because previously the app I would historically like recommend is Filmic Pro, right? But I look at it and it's Blackmagic camera. It's 100% free. It's just 47 megabytes in size. It gives you a ton of customization in like what ProRes coding you used, whether or not you enable ProRes log. It is so freaking good. It honestly puts to shame any other like pro mode inside like Android cameras, except for Sony. The Sony Pro mode inside their video capture is absolutely insane and really good, but their default output is really bad or mediocre, or I would say bad given like the $1,500 pricing of the flagship Sony phones. So my point here is like the iPhone actually gives you pro features that, sure, it does not give you a lot of functionality directly in app to work with stuff like ISO, white balance and stuff like that. However, if you actually know how to use those things, you are so much better off with the iPhones like Pro RAW and ProRes and ProRes log and capture, combined with some pro apps. The two main apps you have to keep in mind for video, the one is now Blackmagic camera, or you can use Filmic Pro, but it's kind of haven't gotten not that great reviews in recent memory. I have used Blackmagic camera for basically all my pro capture. And then of course for the iPhone, I always forget what it's called because I haven't yet reinstalled it on my iPhone. I'll try to think about it while I record.
ProRes video with log. So this is a flat picture profile which you'll be able to color in post. Now, although a lot of you guys probably will never use this feature, if you are a pro filmmaker, then this might be something that's vital for you. Now, for slow motion,
how could I have forgotten it? I briefly looked it up. It's Halide. Halide is the #1 like pro capture thing for the iPhone for images, and believe me, the amount of customization you do there is not only is it more profound than what you would do on like the Pixel 8 Pro mode or how Samsung has like their pro video modes, but it's also like so nicely visually cohesive. It's so much better. So if you really want pro experience in the iPhone, yes, you have to pay for Halide, but it's very well worth it. And for video, you don't have to pay a cent for it. Blackmagic camera.
Really good, but we've got some improvements on slow motion on the S24 Ultra. So you can do 1080p 240 frames a second on both devices, but Samsung has now got rid of the super slow-mo feature, which used to give you 960 frames but at very, very bad quality. They've replaced this now with 120 frames a second at 4K. You can see here that we do get a lot more detail in slow motion at that 4K resolution. However, with the iPhone, you can shoot slow motion with all of the different lenses. So with the ultra wide, with the primary as well as the zoom. With the S24 Ultra, you can only shoot slow motion with the primary camera.
And this also comes down to actual like having real control over. It's similar to how like you could argue that the A17 Pro has less graphics performance than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, but with how well like the Metal API works on top of it, you will usually get not only just higher performance, which yeah, sometimes the Snapdragon might take that, sometimes the iPhone. It will depend a little bit on the game. Maybe some games would want more than 8 gigs of RAM than the iPhone has. It doesn't matter. But then when you look at frame time consistency, you'll find that the iPhone absolutely destroys any of the competition. And then also thanks to like proper developer outreach and stuff like that, you also get like support for a lot more games in like 120 not even 120 FPS necessarily, but you got like 120 hertz modes. Even if the game itself runs at 80 and 90 FPS or around that, thanks to variable refresh rate, it looks super smooth anyway. And I think there is something similar happening with the cameras, right? Because a lot of the sensors, if they're older, if they're really small, right, they will be limited in like how many frames per second they capture, and depending on, because they have capture so little light, which means there's way less light like per image, so the sensor by default will not allow that. But Apple like works with Sony, then takes the sensor, combines it really intricately with its own processor so that it can read the data very quickly from the sensor, right? Samsung cannot go quite as detailed into it. Samsung historically has built like their own processors and even their own camera sensors, and in fact the main camera sensor in Samsung is a Samsung sensor. However, because they have now fallen behind in terms of like processors, Qualcomm wins. This is why the Galaxy S24 Ultra does not utilize the latest Exynos. It only uses the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And in terms of sensors, it has fallen behind Sony. Granted, it has always been behind Sony in that area. So it's hard to actually, like, Samsung is like halfway there using their own tech, but not fully, so they cannot fully optimize it as the way they should, nor do they have the best tech in town. So Apple really is doing well, because Apple is not building their own processor, right? It's their own processor, but they build it at TSMC. They don't have a problem with that. So they do. Obviously, it's still their own processor with their own intellectual property and stuff like that. And while their sensors definitely aren't theirs, they're Sony's, and there are some rumors that Apple might build their own sensors in the future. Guess what? Because Apple works with Sony directly, because Apple buys those sensors in as much in advance as possible, and then because everything that Apple puts on top of it is their own processor, is their own software, their own operating system. This is how we get even like the ultra bad, like ultra wide camera, right, which really does not capture enough detail. It still gets like slow motion on the iPhone, even though the sensor itself probably wouldn't be rated for that just by default, as it's sold by Sony to other smartphone manufacturers.
Audio, I'll let you guys have a listen.
Audio tests on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max. There are lots of cars in the background.
I found that in recent years the iPhone allows more background noise during such recording, but the voice itself sounds more natural.
Crazy guy shouting as well. So let's see how much of that background noise that actually comes through. Let me know what you think.
Now, I think both actually record great audio, but with the noisy background, I do think that the S24 Ultra had better noise cancellation. Let me know what you guys think.
I honestly don't think that Apple does as much noise cancellation in general on videos. Usually their noise cancellation is like for video calls. Also, interesting how the turntable, right? Because historically, right, we've had like this meme, you know, where like the Galaxy S is underwater, and you cannot see the phone because its edges are so slim, and with its curved screen, it basically perfectly blends into the environment. Only that little black dot there. And yes, on the iPhone you do have the larger notch, obviously, or dynamic island, excuse me, but then you have this incredibly impressive, completely uniform bezel, which is actually interesting. I thought that the S24 Ultra had a completely uniform bezel as well. I knew that it was thicker than the iPhones. So yeah, but I'm digressing here.
Fast style camera comparison.
But I'm actually a small plus to Samsung. While I do think those curved edges look much prettier, just for usability perspective, I would prefer basically an exact compromise. Like here, it's sharp edges almost, right? They're ever so slightly curved, and the reason for that is the inclusion of the S Pen, so they're trying to give you as much space as possible. If they were to cut off this portion the way the iPhone did, they would lose necessary internal space that is currently like going towards the S Pen. They would have to slim down the battery. It would be a disaster, right? But on the iPhone, the cutoff, while the rounding looks nice and immersive, it does cut off a little too much sometimes. So I would prefer for the iPhone to be more like this, and this, if possible, to be more like these. In fact, the S24 and S24 Plus are probably the perfect phones when it comes to how they're curved, because they don't cut off too much possible screen real estate, but they also don't look a little boring like the Ultra does these days.
Between the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max, let me just say that both of these have excellent cameras. You really can't go wrong with either, and they are some of my
nice touch, by the way, for him to go with like the natural titanium colors on both
favorite smartphone cameras. I have no problem shooting with either of these as my daily. Of course, there are certain areas where one is better than the other. I would say that the iPhone has better low light overall, as well as better dynamic range. And we still do have better video in some situations, especially from the selfie camera as well as cinematic video. But come on, we're going to give some credit to the S24 Ultra. Samsung has done a great job of improving video on the S24 Ultra. You also do get things like 8K. And let's not forget that the S24 Ultra also has that dedicated 3x zoom camera, which is going to give you a much better zoom in that range between 3 to 4.9 times compared to the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I'd also say that the S24 Ultra does have better extended zoom in good light. And I think that's thanks to Samsung's work on extended zoom over the past few years. And Samsung also has a lot of these new AI features, which I think can be useful for a lot of people. Now, there are lots of other features as well that both devices have, which we'll be comparing in the SuperSaf style hands-on comparison of both devices. That's going to be coming very soon, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon if you don't want to miss it. If you are thinking of buying any of these devices, you can use my exclusive affiliate link down in the description below, and that will give you up to double the storage, as well as up to $150 in instant Samsung credit. This is what I think anyway. What do you guys think of the cameras of the S24 Ultra and the iPhone 15 Pro Max? Do drop me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful.
So, big thank you for both TechTablets and SuperSaf. I hope my content was transformative enough to not be flagged by either them or YouTube. You can see my direct thoughts here, though I do think that the best way to put them is to just put out myself in the front here. And I think the core here is the iPhone retains its crown, definitely. Its camera crown. It still handily wins video across both selfie and most back cameras. The only exception that I've seen is low light 5x shots. Hardly like a super relevant thing. Okay, my iPad showed me that my image was like really freaking out, and I don't know if that's because I changed the size of my face on screen. I hope it doesn't happen again. And beyond that, I would say the dynamic range on the iPhone is either better by default, or the differences are so small that it comes down to aesthetic preference, where I would say that sometimes maybe Samsung will bring up some shadows out better and stuff like that. But it will be such a small difference that, for example, I actually do prefer slightly darker shadows. But then in scenarios where like you have like reflective windows or water and stuff like that, and suddenly you have to deal with like really stark contrast, this is where I would say the iPhone definitely wins. The iPhone definitely loses in great lighting zoom stills, but then it wins stills across almost everything else. It wins in stills in low light zoom actually, except for at 3x. You could argue between 3x and 4.9x, but I would say that anything above 4.5x is so close to 5x, you should just switch to the 5x. The main camera is also better at low light. The ultra wide is basically indistinguishable. There are currently some software problems on Samsung that result in either really dark scenarios or artificial light to turn into purplish hues, which is really bad in my opinion, and I hope they fix it. Beyond that, portrait mode, I do find that the main sensor portraits on the iPhone look better. S do 5x portraits, then you have a good in between with the 3x on Samsung, which is a nice touch. I do find that the iPhone's ability to turn photos into portraits usually comes out more natural. Samsung is now doing more stuff with AI in that area, so I don't know if they've drastically improved that from the S23 Ultra, but kind of doubted that they would have like really natural like bokeh depth of field effect if they previously didn't have it. There are nice AI gimmicks in the Galaxy S24 Ultra. I definitely wouldn't base my camera purchase on smartphone camera purchase on that, especially since those features will have to be paid for after late 2025. So there isn't even that much more to compare. I guess you could say that like Samsung definitely has done some catching up, maybe with like overall video capture from the main sensor, but then we still saw in stuff like action mode where the iPhone still looked way better, and a lot of things I believe will have to be cleaned up over the next 2 to 3 months, where Samsung will definitely be giving us a lot of like post-release updates. Definitely anything AI related will be improved over and over again with the Samsung. This is their first phone that promises 7 years of updates, so while maybe after the first year those updates will not be like super tailored to the hardware, at least there is always potential now with this phone to keep getting improved, because I believe that the 15 Pro Max will also get like 7 or 8 years of support, and then way beyond that with security updates, because this is the first device that Apple has with like 8 gigs of RAM, a 3nm processor, really good software, really good battery life and stuff like that, USB-C. There's a lot worth supporting here. But that's neither here nor there. So I would say that I found both videos very helpful. I think that I honestly didn't expect the iPhone to win as decisively as it did. I'm obviously happy for Apple, but as a consumer who likes a little more competition, it makes me also a tad sad. Not too much though, because I do happen to own the 15 Pro Max. And my last point would be my outlook towards the Galaxy S25 Ultra and the iPhone 16 Pro Max. We are supposedly not getting any changes to the ultra wide next year on the Samsung, but we are most likely getting a 48 megapixel ultra wide on the iPhone. That would be quite destructive for the ultra wide comparisons, but if we imagine that both get a better ultra wide, then the iPhone 16 Pro Max will pull far ahead of the S24 Ultra until the S25 Ultra basically comes in to better compete. Then every rumor points towards the main sensor on the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra being largely the same as the one on the S24 Ultra, and by that extension also the S23 Ultra. On the iPhone, it's supposedly a next-gen sensor that is larger, specifically built for better HDR. Kind of really worried for the S25 Ultra and definitely for the S24, because like in 8 months, oh god, granted it's in 8 months, so it's not like it's completely fair of a comparison point, but when you will look at the phone for the next holiday season, that phone, and you're either between iPhone or Samsung, there will be only one camera king there, believe me. That camera king is basically already decided, but now with much better hardware and the next gen chip, that will be a hard sell if you still want to maybe consider the S24 Ultra by that point. The zoom camera, Apple will most likely keep the 12 megapixel 5x with its really good sensor shift image stabilization this year on the 16 Pros, and then supposedly will get like a resolution uplift the year after. So quite a lot of changes actually coming in the next couple of years. I also think that the Chinese competition actually has a lot of sway there because they're so aggressive in adopting like really large sensors, wide aperture optics and stuff like that. So I'm really looking forward to it. There's also still the question, what will Apple exactly do with AI this year and the next? Samsung obviously has shown their cards. Let's see how they keep optimizing. And then with iPhone, we'll see a lot at WWDC. And then afterwards, let's see how much might be exclusive to like the 15 Pro or maybe even the 16 Pro. So there's a lot that's up in the air. I give some kudos to the S24. Honestly, given its price point, I'm not actually impressed by it whatsoever. I think as an overall flagship, it's nice. But given sort of like brand power and stuff like that, it's kind of weird that it's not at least matching the price of the iPhone in the US. Now I know here in Germany it's a little bit cheaper, so I find it therefore a better deal, not than the iPhone, but better than it is in the US. But if we are going by US pricing, I really have a hard time recommending any Samsung there currently. Like, yeah, I know the Galaxy S24 might like compete really well with like the iPhone 15, right? But then for $200 more, you get a vastly superior Pro. And then the S24 Plus is actually a little more expensive than the iPhone 15 Plus. But yeah, it does have more storage and does have an LTPO screen. But then it's only $200 below the iPhone Pro Max. And there you get everything better, basically. So, yeah, because also you do get like Exynos on the base models. So this is just me still working through a lot of data regarding the S24 generation. Now we do get an insight into the cameras of the S24 Ultra. Maybe I'll check out some content for the base models. Regardless of that, I'm seeing that my video is starting to develop some issues and I definitely want to finish before it goes completely haywire. Regardless of any of that, I thank you everyone who tuned in into this video live or into my last video that's now up to 3,000 views. Thank you very much for that. We're now at over 75,000 subscribers again. I've lost some during my 3-week hiatus, but we are now back up and higher than ever. Let's continue that. Let's build up to, I don't know, 100,000 by the middle of the year or something like that. I definitely would appreciate that. Let's grow globally and let's create one of the best tech communities here on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. See you guys next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.